Welcome, everyone, to this month's virtual talk for the MIT alumni group here in Australia. It's great to see everyone. This week, it is a huge privilege to introduce my former colleague and friend, Alison Criscitiello. I studied with Alison at MIT when I was in graduate school in the joint program between MIT and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And Alison, among many accolades, was the first person to ever receive a PhD in glaciology from MIT. And she actually petitioned to have that particular degree be awarded. And since she's left, there have been others who have also gotten that degree. Alison is an ice core scientist and also a very accomplished high altitude mountaineer. She is currently an assistant professor and also the director of the Canadian Ice Core Lab at the University of Alberta in Canada. And she's also the co-founder of Girls on Ice Canada. She's also a National Geographic explorer. And a couple of years ago, I was able to see a wonderful National Geographic film that featured Alison and her family that was titled For Winter, which speaks to Alison's interest in ice and snow, and also her daughter, who is named Winter. Alison has numerous scientific and mountaineering awards, too many to mention in detail in this talk. There were some listed in the bio. One that I did want to point out that I'm quite impressed by is she has been awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal for her contributions to Arctic climate research. So I'll leave it at that, but it is absolutely great to have Alison here with us today. And she's going to be presenting on some of her research looking at ice cores in Canada. Alison, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm here in Canada and I feel like I've been invited into your world. So thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen real quick here. PowerPoint. Okay. And then, let's see. Continue to share.
That looks good, Alison. I can see that full screen. Looks good.
Okay, great. And then, yeah, I mean, I don't mind being interrupted if you have questions or if you want to hang on to them till the end. I'll cut myself off if I hit 40 minutes because I'd really love to talk to y'all. So, yeah, we'll see how far I get up until about then. But thank you again for having me. This is really special. I thought what I would use this time with you speaking about is sort of, I mean, a little bit of how and why I do what I do. Just I was assuming there were no other ice core scientists in the room, but I may be wrong. And then also just kind of share some very new results. They're basically all in review right now, so super fresh, but from two of my newest ice coring projects here in Canada. So, and the first one is a core I drilled in 2022 on Mount Logan, which is Canada's highest peak. And then the second one, which I drilled with a big team and lots of folks internationally last spring on Axel Heiberg Island, which is a little island in the Canadian high Arctic. And so we'll jump right in and do the how and why by walking you through a little bit of the Mount Logan project. And I just wanted to say up front that I'm presenting a lot of results today because I'm the one here and I went to MIT, but these results are mostly generated by my incredible students, the Logan ones of which were largely driven by Kira Holland, my PhD student who's been working since 2022 when the ice got back here on the Mount Logan record. And I also wanted to say from the start here that I recognize and appreciate the work with our First Nations partners. The land on which I work is not where I'm from. It is their land, and it is a huge privilege to work together with them. And I kind of work in and around the territories of the Kluane, Champagne, Ajac, and White River First Nations, so it's quite a privilege. Okay, so I like using the Logan expedition to walk through a bit of the science, how we do this kind of work, especially the high altitude ice coring work, and then I'll share with you first results. Okay, so first, a little bit of, very background, broad science, but why do we do this? It's not particularly comfortable. It's very expensive. And so why do we go through the trouble of drilling these records in the first place? Just as a general comment, I mean, there are other paleoclimate records in the world. And, we have sediment cores and tree rings and coral records. To me, I mean, I guess I'm biased, but ice cores are special. They give us a glimpse into the past, not just of, the chemistry of all sorts of things that can precipitate in snow from the time that it was precipitated, but they also actually capture ancient atmosphere and give us this ability to look back in time and look at what the concentrations of various components of the atmosphere were in the past. And so the real power of this, of course, is that we have the satellite era. We have, from the 1970s to present, we have observational records, we have satellite records of all these different things we care about in the Earth's climate system. But before then, we really don't. And so we rely on these proxies for reconstructing various parts of the climate in the past. There is a lifetime of things that we use ice cores to reconstruct. And I just listed here a few that we basically always reconstruct with every ice core we drill, at least these days. Most of which you probably have heard about. So, our long-term temperature records are from ice cores. We use stable isotopes to reconstruct temperature in the past, especially here in Canada, and perhaps where you are as well. People are really increasingly concerned about our ability to predict wildfire behavior. And a lot of this is actually reliant on our ability to reconstruct wildfire behavior in the past. And we can do this with pretty shocking precision in ice core records. We can look at not just changes in frequency and intensity of wildfires in the past, but we can also look at changes in vegetation over time that was burning. So they're a really good tool in terms of wildfire reconstructions as well. In the last maybe 5 or so years, I've actually focused a lot on reconstructing environmental contaminant records in the polar regions and in high mountain non-polar regions. And these range from things that we care about in drinking water, PFAS, for example, to CFC replacement compounds, all sorts of different contaminants that are now ubiquitous on Earth. So it's kind of a newer, but I'm finding more important arm of ice core research. And then I had to write marine productivity because that's at MIT. This was my original area of expertise. I was developing new sea ice proxies in ice cores. So new chemical species that we could measure in ice from land-based ice cores that could tell us about the ocean in the past. So that's a very broad, quick overview of some of the why, I guess, of ice cores. So I'm going to move a little bit onto Logan, and I guess the segue here is, like if we've drilled some ice cores and we've got a bunch in Antarctica and we've got a bunch in Greenland, why do we care about continuing to drill them, and why would we go particularly difficult places to do so? And that's primarily because ice cores do contain global climate information. There are some things, take large volcanic eruptions, that every single ice core on Earth will record, but they also record a lot of regional and sometimes extremely local climate information. And so if all of our long-term climate records are from the polar regions, we're lacking a lot of information, not only from the areas in between, but from the areas where most of the human population lives. And so our longest ice core records, which now I can say this only as of the last year, are a million years old, which is mind-blowing. But previously, for a very long time, the 800,000 year records that we had were from their polar records. But there are non-polar high mountain locations that are cold enough and they're high enough for long enough periods of time that we have tens of thousands of years worth of climate records. And among those, Mount Logan is very special. It's just shy of 20,000 feet tall. It's in the middle of the largest non-polar ice field in the world, the St. Elias Range. And it also just has this really distinct and unusual kind of geology in that instead of the normal shape of a mountain that we think of, like the Matterhorn or something, it's a bowl. It's a huge bowl that's sitting up in the free troposphere above 17,500 feet. And this is a bowl that's over 12 miles long, over 3 miles across. It's quite big. And And so a lot of the things that we're looking at or looking for when we want to drill an ice core actually do exist high up on this mountain, which is pretty unusual. Yeah, so it's around 5,900 meters above sea level, and it has these characteristics that we like. It has fairly stagnant ice that's not flowing, very cold mean annual temperatures. There are never positive degree days that we know of. So there's no melt. There's none of the record has been destroyed yet due to melt, even in the height of summer. And previous work in this region has suggested that environmental conditions in the St. Elias are largely controlled by the strength and position of a very important mode of climate variability, the Aleutian low. And sorry if this is a repeat for anyone here, but the Aleutian low is a large semi-permanent low pressure system which is strongest in the wintertime. And it has a very strong influence on precipitation and as well as temperature in the region because it influences storm tracks along the Gulf of Alaska. So there are other sort of important modes of climate variability that we can interrogate with records, like this one from Mount Logan. But I'm just mentioning the Aleutian low because I'm going to share some preliminary results, and it's sort of important in that context. So this was a particularly sort of risky project, I guess. There was probably more of a chance of it not succeeding than succeeding due to all the altitude limitations. So I'm happy to say that we pulled it off. This was the general sort of timeline, and the project goals, of course, were to safely drill this thing after locating the ice coring site, and I'll show a few photos in a moment. But we got the ice back to the lab here in Edmonton in July 2022. And then this is actually, it might seem like a long time, but it's actually a very fast timeline for a 325 meter long core. We finished the CFA term there, continuous flow analysis. So that's basically all of the trace elements, all of the major ions, black carbon, conductivity, particles. Like we generated all of the data, all of the non-gas data by the end of that same year. And then you'll kind of see since what we've been working on was the dating. The dating of the ice can take quite a while. And that includes using tephra tie points, so fingerprinting volcanic eruptions in the chronology, things like that. And then since the end of 2024, we've continued with the deep chronology where we can't do annual layer counting. And then, of course, starting on interpretation of the records. Okay, so this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but this is the main new result, which just came out finally. So there are two previous records that were in other slightly lower but nearby areas to the core that we drilled. So you'll see this one Northwest Call was drilled in 1980, it was 103 meters deep. And pay attention to the accumulation rate here. So they had about a 0.38 meters of water equivalent per year kind of accumulation rate. In 2002, 186 meter core was drilled, which was closer to the one that we drilled. They had an estimated age that was at least 14,000 years old at the bottom, which is partly what drove me and my team to go back there to drill and try to find older ice, which is with a similar looking accumulation rate to that record before. Okay, and then you'll see ours, which doesn't look anything like it, basically by all metrics. It was 325 meters deep, which is exceptional for a mountaintop core. And you'll notice that the accumulation rate of our record was 3 meters water equivalent per year. So this is 6 times higher, like a 6 times higher snowfall rate than the previous records estimated. The immediate question is, were the old records wrong? Can these all be true? What's going on here? So I'll leave you with that for the moment, and I will sort of answer that. But I wanted to leave that first result with you and just walk through a couple quick things, just because this is kind of niche work in terms of how we did this. So in May of 2021, prior to the drilling, I went up. Also, this is just me. I'm sort of a fast and light, try to do things as small as possible with a small footprint kind of gal. So just my climbing partner, Rebecca, and I here went up Logan in May of 2021. We installed this weather station, which sits at 18,500 feet on Prospector's Call, which is a high point very close to the summit. And this weather station itself is exceptional. It's the highest weather station in North America. It's one of the highest in the world. I should have pulled it up so we can see how nasty it is there right now. It sends data to a public website every 5 minutes. And this has really kind of helped raise the roof of like human observational networks. We lack meteorological data from high mountain environments, which in many cases are located in places that are warming the fastest due to elevation dependent warming, but which are unmonitored for obvious reasons. So at the time, I didn't actually think this aspect was going to be so important, but it has been, and this weather station remains. So we installed that in 2021. And there's just some photos of the weather station. What we also did, this seems a little silly, but on the top right is Rebecca and I on the summit. That's the true summit of Logan. We remeasured the summit height, which a number of people were very interested in because it's an ice summit, and they assumed that it had been lowering since the original measurements. And within error of things like the geoid, which I have no idea how to calculate, but geophysicists do, they took the data, and within error, it has not changed. But then the main objective here, which is what we typically do a year before drilling, was the radar survey. And so this is how we now, this wasn't true a couple decades ago, this is now what we now do to really try to find the very best place to drill a core. Let's see. So on the top are some pictures of these two radar systems. So you basically pull around two different frequency systems, one that can resolve sort of the near surface very well, one that can resolve the bedrock interface very well, and you try to put it together and get a good picture of everything from your skis all the way to the bedrock interface below. And we're looking not just necessarily for the deepest spot, which would indicate the oldest ice, but we also really want to make sure that the layering all the way down is pretty undisturbed. And you can imagine it's kind of the same ideas with like a sediment core or something else that's laid down over time. If there's funky flow, if layers are overturned, things like that, we will have a very difficult or impossible time with the chronology. And if you can't date it, it's useless. So the radar piece is really important. So that was the sort of the recon year. And again, this is mostly what me and my team do now. We'll go a year prior to do all this kind of work and set up a weather station if we can, even if it's just up there for the 2 years, just to get some local meteorological data. So then in May of 2022, I went up with a slightly larger team. This is still small for something like this, but it was as large as I wanted. So we were 7 total. We started at 7 total. And we ended as a team of 4. Everyone is alive and well, but there were 3 medevacs for altitude issues. So there were only 4 of us at the end drilling, which is in fact what I had planned for. We started at 7 and I thought that half of the people would be there at the end, which is exactly right. On the way up, we stopped at this very inhospitable spot that I don't like stopping, Prospector Call, and serviced the weather station. I think this is kind of cool, and in case there's any engineers in the room, the only thing I actually swapped out, which is still there and doing very well, is what looks like the metal rod at the top, but it's not. I changed out the wind vane, which was the only thing that didn't hold up very well, to an acoustic wind sensor, which I didn't know anything about, but some really great people at Campbell Scientific did. And it just looks like a metal pipe, but it has a certain aperture at the top, and it basically measures it's acoustic. And it's really cool because it's kind of unbreakable, but it can rime up, so it can close up with ice, but then, it will, when the rime ablates, then it pops back online. So this has been actually pretty great. That was the only thing we sort of had to fix on the way up. And then, of course, the main event was the drilling. And this is the equipment that I use for a lot of my work. It was built in Whitehorse in the Yukon here, and it's based off of the Danish Hans Townsend tipping tower drill. This one's called the Canadian Eclipse, but it's a pretty simple drill. I really love it. It's kind of analog. There's no software. It's just got knobs and a manual brake. And the whole drill, it's a 900-pound drill, but it breaks down into components that are small enough that you can pull them around with a sled. You can build it as two people in under a day, that kind of thing. So it's actually pretty efficient system, even though it looks a bit bulky. And the entire drill, that whole mast that's vertical, because I'm in the drilling position, the whole drill swings horizontally, which is why there's that inclined trench dugout to allow you to pull the sections of core out. And it drills 1.5 meters at a time. So I guess what I sort of realized in this case, and it's something I've taken forward as I do more and more high altitude drilling, is that you sort of have to do this as fast as you can. People deteriorate at altitude, and it's not that fun. So we actually split our 4 people into 2 drill shifts, and we kept the drill running for 12 to 14 hours a day, just bopping back and forth every 2 to 3 hours, just so we could get down there as quick as we could. This is kind of the setup. Again, it's a little bit fast and light, but that's just the floorless drill tent, so that we could work in inclement weather. Obviously, if looking at the accumulation rate there, it snows a lot. It's right on the Gulf of Alaska. This is why it's such a great and high resolution ice core record, and it makes it a terrible place to work. And then as we drilled too, I learned some other good things on this particular expedition, but we kept the ice packaged. These are on the bottom right there, these ice core boxes. They fit 9 meters per box. And we kept things packaged in the boxes, basically ready to fly, like in a net. And then every single time there was a weather window, a helicopter would come and hover and take ice out, which was really critical. I don't remember the final weight, but it was over a ton of ice, of course. So if we had been waiting at the end for all the ice to get flown off to lower elevation, to the sea can, the freezer sea can that was staged down by the runway, we would have probably been up there for another 2 weeks. So this worked really well, just flying it out every chance we could. And then I left one video in. People always ask how we got down. Well, we flew the ice off, but we skied off. It's a really spectacular 10,000-foot ski. Okay, here's some first results from the Logan core. So the first thing we do really is date the core, which maybe sounds boring, but it's an art and it's fun. And what we do in the upper portion of the record is use all the time series that have an annual or even a seasonal signal in them, and we annually layer count the record. So 1 to 3 people do this independently, and then we check. And of course, there's automated ways to do this, but we still, whether we use them or not, we still have at least one person manually, annually layer count and check it. And you're looking here just at an example of 20 meters of the core, which covers about 9 years here. And notably, we were able to annually layer count this record down very deep because of that high accumulation record. It was annually layer counted down to 256 meters. Usually we can see these layer, they get squished more like around 100 meters or something, and then we can't annually layer count anymore. So it's quite deep. In this case, you can kind of see at the top there, the stable isotope record, which is supposed to be our temperature proxy, looks kind of funky, which checks out with previous records. So we didn't actually use the stable isotope record for dating. But peroxide and many of the major ionic species show really beautiful seasonal signals. And some of the ionic species peak in different seasons, which actually allowed us to constrain a subannual chronology down to 256 meters. This does mean it's not as old as we thought, of course, but it has the benefit of being extremely high resolution and letting us answer different questions. You're looking here at some of the tie points in the annually layer counted portion of the record. So there's a very clear tie point at 168 meters. You're looking at the bottom left there. And that's the plutonium-239 peak, which we use this as a tie point in every ice core on Earth, which correlates with the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Still strange to me that that's something we can detect, but it's quite clear in this one, so that was a nice tie point. And then in addition with this record, there were 4 volcanic events that another PhD student here, Hannah Youssef, has been able to geochemically fingerprint. And the one that you're looking at the really beautiful glass shards of in the top right there is the 1912 eruption of Katmai. But she's done very sort of crypto tephra. There's a lot of glass in that particular picture. It's a nice one. A lot of them are more crypto. So, a couple pieces of glass for her to work with. But she also identified the 76 and 86 eruptions of Augustine and some other eruptions as well. So this is all really to say that this is actually an extremely well-constrained chronology. I don't think anyone could question this chronology. And so again, that sort of begs the question about the older chronologies. Can they all possibly be correct? Or is there something wrong with the old chronologies of those old cores? And I guess I will answer. All I'll say now is that we didn't realize that was something that we would be looking into because we didn't know that we would find this very distinct record at this site. But it is. We have some archive samples left from those old cores, and we are simultaneously working on locating tephras in those and seeing if volcanic horizons were misdated, things like that. So we are simultaneously looking into that, which was never the original plan. Here, yeah, I said most of this isn't published. Well, the first one came out in January, so this one is. This is the first Logan publication. It's open source if anyone's interested in this or wants to fall asleep. But it is quite good. But it's mostly the chronology and reporting on these unexpectedly high accumulation rates. It also does show some nice work proving that warm season, not wintertime, atmospheric conditions actually play the largest role here in determining precipitation variability in these highest elevation regions along the Gulf of Alaska. And then the next chunk of work that we're most actively working on right now, in addition to the deeper chronology, we don't actually have a bottom age yet. So in addition to working on that deeper chronology below the annually layer counted part, is work on understanding ocean atmosphere controls on that water isotope variability, which, like you saw quickly there, doesn't actually show a nice annual signal. And so Kira's working on that now. So I can share, because she's got some findings here, the preliminary key takeaways without getting bogged down in a bunch of figures. But from this sort of stable isotope record from the new Logan core, are that it's actually certainly not driven by the Aleutian low, as was previously thought. And second, a regional atmospheric circulation index, it's called the Alaska Blocking Index, but it's a different mode of climate variability that's kind of unexpected because it's a lot more localized. Actually shows the strongest relationship to another marker that I didn't talk about, deuterium excess. But deuterium excess is related to the stable isotope records, but we use it as a moisture source proxy. And that deuterium excess also shows a strong correlation with sea ice in the Bering Sea. And so this is all in agreement with circulation anomalies that we actually see in composite maps of deuterium excess and this Alaska Blocking Index. There are 2 other papers. I'll check my time. Okay, yeah, I'll skip. We have 2 other papers in review right now that are really, I'm really excited about. But yeah, I'm gonna skip to this, sharing the second piece with you, which is the core that we drilled. We being a very large team in a lot of countries, including Australia, on Axel Heiberg Island, which is a little island in the Canadian Arctic, right at 80 degrees north. It's on the western edge of the Canadian Arctic archipelago on the Arctic Ocean side. And I think a really special thing about this is that our sort of historical Canadian drilling, including my own, but a lot of glaciologists who came before me at the Geological Survey of Canada really focused on the eastern edge of the archipelago, kind of for logistical reasons. Our jumping off point is on Baffin Bay in Resolute, and it's just a lot harder to work on the western edge. You have to kind of island hop with your equipment and your planes, and it's a lot harder to work farther from our logistics hub. So this was many years in the making, and what it took to actually happen finally was Dorte Dahl Jensen, a very prominent Danish glaciologist who's led East Grip and basically all of the deep drilling on Greenland, and her team bringing a bunch of equipment directly from East Grip and Greenland over to Axel Heiberg. So we had the drill that you just saw in Logan. We had the Eclipse drill there, and we had the Danish Hans Townsend drill. We had both drills. And this camp is a mix of all those things, with scientists from Australia National University and from Brazil, all over Canada. Yeah, and in terms of sort of scientifically what was driving this, I mean, because of what I sort of just said, like we have sort of sea ice proxy, sea ice reconstructions from Baffin Bay, basically from ice cores that we've been able to drill along the Baffin Bay coast, but we lack those kind of records from the Arctic Ocean side. And this particular ice cap is very well situated, and for being so small, it's deep, which we knew from airborne radar, on the order of 600 meters deep. And the Germans did a very comprehensive airborne survey that actually gave us a little bit of an estimate on age, or an idea that there might be a full Holocene record up there. So there were a lot of intriguing reasons why to go to this particular island and this particular ice cap. So yeah, in this case, that was sort of why we prioritized it. But the other reason was that despite being at 80 degrees north, kind of like its Baffin Bay counterparts, even at that latitude, there is a significant amount of melt in the summer. And this record had the climate record is destroyed in lots of sections all the way down 70 meters. So melt has formed at the surface, even just from a few positive degree days in the height of summer. It's percolated, it's refrozen. The next summer, the same process happens over and over and over for enough years that there was sort of melt effects much deeper than we had anticipated. And this actually is what drives a lot of our sort of prioritization these days. Where can we go quickly in places that are currently or about to be melt affected? And so I guess I mostly covered this, but we really wanted to just also understand how continued warming may impact coastal Nunavut communities, and this is related to things like sea ice and our sea ice reconstructions and how they feed into models of future sea ice in the Arctic Ocean and in Baffin Bay, and all the other implications for local communities. The only other video, I just thought this was also a bit unique just because it was so out there. So this is what it looks like. So a couple of us went in early and in a small Twin Otter and made this runway that you can see the second plane coming in on. And this just consists of going in a small plane with a couple people and one skidoo and a little modular groomer that you pull behind it, and spending a few days making a runway to get this is a bigger Bassler to come in. But that's what the whole camp looks like. It took 63 days, and we drilled by 100% the deepest ice core ever drilled in the Americas. It was 613 meters. The Logan one actually was the deepest before that, at 325. And since the 60s before that, it was a 310 meter ice core from Devon Ice Cap. This is what it looks like. So the Danish Hans Townsend is a bigger version of the Canadian eclipse. And this is just a shot of inside the drill tent, but that incline trench, it's just the same. It's all the same, but it's about 3 times bigger. This is a shot of the bottom meter. This is something in my career I probably will never see again, or maybe one more time. So maybe this is only exciting to me. But when we drill these deep ice cores like this, and you get near the bed, you know you're near the bed because you start pulling up kind of silty material. You know, you go from 2 months of drilling clear ice to it's a little bit cloudy, and you know you're within meters, and then you start to pull up rocks, and then once you can't drill anymore with the normal cutter head that we have for ice, you sort of want to confirm the bottom, and that's what this pointy thing is, which I had never used before. The Danes call it Arnold, but it's basically just a bedrock confirmation. And then we try to pull up some pieces, of course, as much material as we can, with this thing that goes on after Arnold, to recover some sediment and rock if we can. So that was the bottom at 613. So this surface to bedrock core, I can say now, is a full Holocene into the last glacial record. In addition to that, I said we brought the eclipse drill too. So we drilled the deep one with the Danish drill, and then we drilled 4 70-meter cores as well, and that those date to 1850 exactly. And those are for looking at atmospheric transport of environmental contaminants, which we need a lot more material to make those measurements. So that's why we overshot, and we did 1850 to present, to just sort of cover the full pre-industrial through industrial. And that's actually what's being led here. The Danes are really leading a lot of the deep core stuff. So I'm excited about the contaminant work. One other thing happened, which I had never been a part of and is really neat, but a woman from UBC who used to be in France, Anaïs Orsi, who's in the middle there in the red, she did this fern air pumping campaign, which actually uses the borehole after we drill to pump an enormous amount of air out of the fern, so above the bubble close-off layer when all the air bubbles are still connected, they're not sealed off from each other. And she does this to do mercury measurements and to do trace gas analyses. It was a cool, interesting, and I don't know, I thought it was an awesome thing to do. I like things that like the borehole's already there. So that was really neat. We only have very preliminary data. So these are scrapings from the field. We take a little scrape. So it's a bag mean, meter mean, stable isotope record. So this is a very low resolution record, but what you maybe can immediately see is that from 0 down to 601 is the Holocene. And then there's the glacial spike. So we know even with this, basically field data so far, it's probably 20,000 year record. We don't know how much time is in the bottom couple meters yet, but it's at least 14,000 years old. So this is really exciting. And that's the dip. The dip into the depleted values is the last glacial. And then this is the last slide. This is I said at the beginning, the continuous flow analysis system. So this is kind of how we continuously melt ice. It's the highest resolution method we have for generating trace element major ion data. We're about to set this up in Canada, but we are not yet quite there yet. A couple other countries do this, and Denmark's one of them. So we are doing this campaign, the continuous flow analysis campaign, this fall, at which point we'll have all of this data and then some. This is kind of a working draft of what the system will be set up like in Copenhagen. But these campaigns for a core like that, it takes about 8 weeks, but you walk away with all the chemistry. So this is what's coming up next for the axle core. So I'll leave it at that. I think we're at 40. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Alison. That was really interesting. I'm sure we've got some questions.
Good.
We did have a couple people drop off, but that's all right. I just wanted to ask, first of all, I'm presuming with the second example, that wasn't high altitude, so you didn't have some of those same medical challenges that you would have with the first example that you presented. Is that right?
It's not high altitude. No, it was below 10,000 feet, and you don't have to climb there. You can just fly there. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
because that
Yeah.
I mean, I remember from the documentary I watched as well. I mean, that was really a challenge. I mean, you start with a team of only 7, which is not many people to do all the things you need to do, and then you lose them progressively and have to deal with the medevac and all of that as well. So it's a super challenging environment to try and do science, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, even though there's sort of the Axel project was, to me, so many people. That it was a team of 14, and that is how the Danes operate, and that's how they run their big Greenland camps. Um, and there was actually a medevac. There, with that many people, something's going to happen. But
Right.
I guess there's different risks and it's different probabilities of different things happening. But
Mm.
for sure, I mean, overall, when you throw altitude in the mix, like 20,000 feet or more, that kind of altitude, I think that's like when the new set of challenges really do come. So in some ways, the Axel was that's sort of your more standard polar work, right? You can fly there. Um, if there's bad weather, yes, no one can get to you, but otherwise, sure, you can get a plane in and fly someone to Resolute. And, yeah.
Great. Well,
Yeah.
I'll open it up. Does anyone else have some questions for Alison?
And if not, maybe people can tell me what their background is.
Yeah, absolutely. Kendra, go
No,
ahead.
I don't have a question, but I really enjoyed that. Thank you. And the reason I don't have a
Oh,
question is
thanks.
I'm an ex-physicist, not a glaciologist at all.
Oh,
So it's just really interesting. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
well, thanks for spending this time with me. That's really nice.
Um, Selden, you have a
Yeah.
question? Oh, we can't. Oh, there you are. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, here. Well, I
Just
can't.
It's hard to hear you, Selden. I don't know if maybe something's wrong with your microphone. If you like, you could type your question into the chat if you see the chat button at the bottom. Not sure what's wrong with your sound. Yeah, we can't hear you, unfortunately. But if you want to type your question, that would be fine.
Yeah.
It's just the chat button on the bottom. Alison, while he's doing that, I'll ask another question. Can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about how you preserve these cores? Because some of these, this might be the only time in the world that you actually get together. I'm presuming that you don't melt the whole thing for analysis and you have some archive records as well. Could you tell us a bit about that process?
Yeah. Thanks for asking about that. Let me see. I had a bunch of hidden slides because I didn't know how long I'd go. Um, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Just to show you the lab here. So we sort of thought, I mean, I moved here from the States in 2017 to design and build the first National Ice Core Lab here in Canada, which I now direct. And so this is what it looks like. These photos are a couple years old, so there's a lot more stuff in there actually now. In terms of the archiving, we have a room that's the one on the right there that we keep at -40, which sounds aggressive, but that is the temperature at which we have to long-term store and archive ice because gases can migrate in sub-zero temperatures that aren't below about
Alison,
-35.
you just don't like doing science under comfortable conditions, do you?
Well, you know what? I think I'm actually over it. I like when I'm
We need
working
to
long
do a
days in the freezer
tropical
now.
paleoclimate project.
And I want to work on corals for a little.
But that's
But the
historic. You don't
room,
have to do all your science at that temperature, right?
no,
If you kind of take a core out, correct? Yeah.
no, no. The other side of the lab, which is on the left-hand side, which we do spend 8 hours a day in, is -26 C.
Okay.
So it's comfortable.
That's
Um,
still cold for us Australians.
no, I know. It is also cold for operating saws and holding metal all day, but it's like it's doable.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but that is what the cold. There's obviously a room temperature analytical lab, but the cold side of the facility looks like this. And the archiving. I'm glad you asked that. I mean, it's very. It's like it's always been very important in ice core science, even from when this field started, that you use as little as you possibly can and you save as much as you possibly can. And our general rule of thumb, if it's if it is possible with all the scientists and countries involved in what they want to measure, we try to save a minimum of half of every core we drill. So in that room in the right is half of the Logan core for future scientists to use. And the rest of that 4 kilometers of ice right now, it includes the archive from Axel Heiberg, and it includes the archive sticks from almost every Canadian high Arctic core that's been drilled since the 60s. So it's a pretty big repository. And other countries, Australia is one that has one of the world's largest repositories as well. Theirs, of course, are almost or are entirely from Antarctica, from East Antarctica, near the Australian bases. And then Denmark and the US are other big ones. And we sort of follow all the similar protocols. There's years of method development. We're just sort of following suit in terms of the temperatures to keep the rooms and that kind of stuff. But the archiving is really, it's really important. My own postdoc work was actually during this period where I couldn't drill fast enough to get my own records, and I used archive sticks that people had drilled decades before me.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what the lab looks
Can
like.
I imagine, Alison, it's even more important to drill this core and save it right now because, I mean, I work in climate science. I don't work in glaciology, but I read a lot about how we're losing the world's glaciers. And so we're losing those opportunities to actually have a record of our climate in the past. So it's a bit of a race to get this data, isn't it?
That's true. That's true too. Like, yeah, I guess I said it kind of quickly, but that idea of how we prioritize what we'll do next. I mean, it's a personal thing, but it does feel like there's a lot of urgency that drives where I go now. I know what I'm doing next, and I can't say it's actually where I necessarily would have, just imagined going, but it's the Columbia ice field. It's right here. It's a water tower. It's the source of our drinking water in Edmonton, and it's melting very quickly. So that is driving a lot of what we prioritize. And also, like you said, I mean, you can't always drill replicate cores and think, okay, I'm going to leave a lot in the freezer in the archive for future people to use when there is nowhere to go back to get this record again. So we really just try to save as much as possible.
Yeah. I see Selden's put his question in the chat here. I'll just read it so that we have it on the recording. So his question is about the act of drilling and friction, and how do you prevent that from blurring the layers or contaminating the core, that sort of thing, Alison, that process of drilling?
That's a great question. Okay, so there's sort of 2 pieces to that. And one is that when you're drilling, I guess I didn't actually show the video, but it's obviously the inner barrel is spinning. So you can imagine that there is friction not only at the cutting head, but all along the core as the ice is coming into the barrel up and up and up, but it's still spinning. There also have been sort of like method studies on this. So there is a small bit of melt that can happen at the actual cutting head. But basically, we just assume that the entire surface is contaminated, and we remove the entire outer rind. So every meter cylinder we have, we remove the whole outside by a few different methods, and we basically just take the center 3 by 3 centimeters square stick out of the center. And it's not that we throw everything else out. There are things that you can't really contaminate, like stable isotopes. You can't contaminate stable isotopes. So you can kind of use a Teflon knife, scrape one of those outer pieces and use it for the stable isotope measurements. But for trace elements and major ions and things that, you're right, you can sort of blur in a way, or contaminate by touching it or breathing on it or other handling. We just assume that we did, and we remove the entire kind of rind of the outside. So we end up drilling cores that are sort of wider in diameter than you would think. The 82 millimeter and 102 millimeter are 2 standard, and that seems pretty big for what we actually need, but it's not when you remove all that material to decontaminate. That's a good question.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Any other questions from Kendra, Rahul? If not, that's fine. What we can do is we can wrap up the recording and just say thank you so much, Alison.
Thank you.
I did receive quite a few emails from people saying that they were sorry they missed this, they had a conflict. So we'll put the recording up, and I'm sure a lot more alums will be very pleased that they can watch this after the fact. And I'll send that link to you when it's ready.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And I really appreciate you spending your time with me.
Great. Okay.
Thanks,
With
everyone.
that, wrap up the recording and say goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Alison.